I've made few changes to my code. I've moved my JavaScript code to a script, and I have linked to the JavaScript using the script tag and pointing my source to the external script. So the code is still the same. The only difference is I am just making my code a little bit reader or user friendly for you guys to pick out everything correctly. So this is just to reduce the length of my code here, and the JavaScript is in fact here to effectively explain the login process using server-side PHP programming language. I have added a sign-up page, so that way we can create a user's email address and their password and store this information in our database. So I'm currently using a localhost server, and this way I can test out all of my PHP functions and verify them before uploading them to my remote server. Let's test our improved login page, because now we have added PHP server-side code. So let's go on and test out the registration page, which is a sign-up page, and also the login page. In the sign-up page, I created a logic here that checks if the session email is set, and if it's set, then we also check that the session active is set to true. We're using a strict evaluation here, and we are actually making sure that it is true and not just existing or being set. So once that condition is set to true, we want to display the email address has logged in. If session active isn't set to true, then we want to display the user has logged out. So I also created a simple logout page. Okay, so let's test the code. Now, this is my database. This is where I'll be storing the customer's email address and also their hashed password. In the previous episode, we talked about password hashing and making sure you are actually encrypting users' password before you store them in your database. And this is a clear example of how the hashed password looks like. As you can see, I have no idea what this user's password is. But when they eventually go into login, we're going to be decrypting the password for the user to log in and access their account. So as you can see, I just have two entries here, which is the g@gmail.com and the a@gmail.com. So let's try logging in with c@gmail.com. And remember, this is just an example of an email address. This could be any email address for any user. And then let's try logging in. As you can see, it's going to give us the error message saying authentication failed, incorrect email or password. So that means the email address doesn't exist in the database because we have just A and G. Let's try creating an email address with C. All right, so account creation successful. Verify your account. And this is just to let the user know that they have successfully created their account. Once you create an account, you're actually logged in. So now the email c@gmail has logged in, and as you can see, this is the message saying you have logged in. And you can then log out, and which it has successfully logged me out. As you can see, c@gmail has logged out. So let's log in again. Okay, so c@gmail has logged in, and it shows here account login successful. We're going to show you guys the code right now and then explain important things to know about when you are building login page or sign up page. Okay, so let me show you the code. We're starting with the login code. I'll break down each line of code. That way you can clearly understand how we're able to successfully build this login page and validate the user's email address using PHP server-side scripting. So the first thing we did was to grab the email address, which is sent in the post variable. So in our login page, we have a form and the method is post, and its action is targeting the process login, which is this script here. When the user clicks the submit button, we actually target this element here, which is the email. We've created some important variables that we're going to be using to help us effectively validate the user's email address, authenticate, and also give a result, whether they are logged in or logged out. Created a variable here called stored password, and we set its value to nothing. And user error is a Boolean, so we simply validate the email address that has been sent from the form, and we're using a PHP inbuilt function called filter validate email. And what this does is simply check the email format. Using the function will help us immediately verify the format of the email address. Now, this doesn't authenticate the email address if it's actually operational or if it's actually authentic email address. This just checks the format of the email address, like the one we did in the previous episode. This spread match simply uses a regex pattern to match the values of the email. It makes sure that all of the values are simply alphabets, the @ symbol, integers, the underscore, period, or the hyphen. And these are only the values that you actually use to create an email address. So that way, if someone is trying to enter any character that is outside of this regex here, immediately your code is simply just going to reject it, enter an email, and it is just going to display an error message saying invalid email format, please check. And also if the email is empty, because sometimes users turn off their JavaScript feature on their browser. That way, some of your JavaScript functions may not work. And in this case, I have added the required attribute here. That way, you cannot submit this form until all of the inputs, which is the password and the email, are actually filled out. This will work on modern browsers. Let's say someone is using a really old browser. This attribute required may not work. Let's try this out. So let's say we have removed the attribute. When the user clicks on this submit button, the form will actually submit. As you can see, form submitted, and it says invalid email format. So at this point, this part of our code is working because it checks if the email is empty. And once the email is empty, then we want to display this error message. So just to point out to you guys, so you know that sometimes if your platform is being targeted, the user might use an outdated browser. Once this condition or this code runs valid, the integer becomes 0 and the user error becomes true. So that's the reason why I have these two values up top of my code. I just want to make sure that when my code is actually running, none of these errors have happened. Let's move on. So if valid is not equal to 0, that means this condition never took place. Then we want to move to the next stage of our email validation. And it's similar approach with our JavaScript, where we actually create a list of popular domain names and we split the entered email using the @ symbol, and we targeted the array key 1, which holds the end of the email address. And it's the same approach with the JavaScript. However, just like how I mentioned, just don't want to rely only JavaScript for all of the validation. Array key holding the popular domain names, and match that with the list of popular domain names that are created here. If not in array, which is a PHP function as well, and it also checks an array for an existing value. If not in array means that the email address entered by the user is not in the array, then we want to display the error message here, which is invalid email format, please check. And also the user error becomes true, preventing this part of the code to work. Now let's get to the part where we grab the user's information and then we match the inputted data with the information in our database. We can know if in fact the user owns the account. Again, if the user error is set to false, which is our initial value for the user error before we ran our email validation. For the first thing we did is to prepare our database connection. First thing we did was to select password from customers data where email is equal to the email entered by the user. This SQL query command simply selects the password column where the email is equivalent to the entered email address. When a user enters g@gmail.com, it is going to select this column. I have queried the database using the MySQL query command. Once you run this, it will return the number of rows, and you can then create variable to store the expected data from your database. I have checked if the number of rows is greater than 1. While number of rows is greater than 1, I have assigned row an object variable the value of the query, and the result we're expecting from our query is a column called password where the user's email is equal to the entered email. So stored password is going to have whatever value that is inside of the password column. If the num rows returns no rows at all, then I want to simply display authentication failed, incorrect email or password. When a user enters an email, if the email doesn't exist, which means email isn't equal to email, then this will return 0 rows. Then I want to display this error message here, telling the user that their email is incorrect or their password is incorrect. All right, so now that we have our stored password, assuming this user actually has an account in the database. Now I'm using a password verify function, an encrypted function that uses the password hash. So this is a password decrypt that has a password hash. You use the password verify and the matching password. So this password val is the password that the user has entered along with their email address, and this is the stored password in the database. We're retrieving the password and we're matching the password to find out if the user actually entered the correct password. Password verify takes in 2 arguments: the password that you're trying to match with and the stored password. So this is the entered password by the user, and this is the stored password in our database. So once this is true, this becomes true. Else, if the entered password by the user does not match the stored password in our database, then we want to simply display error message telling the user that the email they've entered is incorrect or the password they've entered is incorrect. We can test this out immediately, see how this works. We know we have 3 accounts here, and I also know the password, so we're going to try logging into any of these accounts. As you can see, it logs me in. That's all for the login page. So let's look at the sign up page. This time we're going to be inserting into the database instead of fetching information from the database to match. Let me just close up this area here so that we can then focus on the remaining sections of the sign up page. So in here, immediately the first line of code here is to query our database, and we search the customer's data table, which is this table here. We are actually checking if there is an email already existing in our system. So you don't want a user to actually have multiple accounts with the same email address. So the first thing you want to do is to check if there is an existing email address, and immediately you want to display the error message saying an account already exists. Here, let's try this. So now we know that these are the set of emails existing in our database. So let's try and create another account using the same email address. Now, as you can see, it says action field account already exists with this email address. So that means this part of our code is working, and this checks if there is an email address already existing in our customers data table. If there is no email existing, which means this is in fact a new customer or a new user trying to register an account, then we want to grab the password that the user has entered and hash it using the password hash function, which has a default of password secret. Now remember, in the previous video, I highlighted the various ways you can actually sort your password to ensure that your password data is actually secured. This is the recommended password hashing algorithm from PHP.net. I'm not going to tell you how to hash your password. You can decide to become creative how you intend to hash and store your user's password. The whole point is to make sure that it is actually secured. And password hash is a simple, fast, and efficient way to encrypt your passwords and make sure that your user sensitive data are stored securely. So once we've been able to hash the password and we have a value inside of the vkey variable, which we have set here to empty, we want to immediately insert into the customer's data table the user's email and the user's encrypted password. Once the insert has been successful, we then want to send the user an email to click a link, thereby enforcing the email validation. If the user creates an account, we're actually going to send them an email urging them to click on the link. This way we can for sure verify that the email is authentic and also in use. But since we are using a local host server demonstration, this part of the code isn't going to work due to the limited mechanisms. I won't be able to show you guys how the email looks like. But if this were to be a remote server, then the email function will actually send this email to the user's email address. So once we have the user logged in, we simply set the active is true, and we also set the session email to the entered email by the user, and we display account creation message. All right, guys. So to round down, we've been able to see how you can simply build a login page and efficiently validate your user's email address using server-side scripting, and also create a sign-up page where we can insert a new set of data with the customer's email address and their encrypted password. Also show you simple database structure, the various columns. Alright, guys, I will see you on the next episode where we break down some interesting web development topics.